I am Ross, 32 years old, teaching English at Westfield High while barely making ends meet. Never thought much about luck until I bought that random lottery ticket after a horrible Monday. When I saw those matching numbers, my life changed instantly. $800,000. Freedom. Hope. But when I told my parents, their response shattered me. Half goes to your brother Alex, or you are not welcome in this family anymore. So I walked out the door. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you will want to hear how my family showed their true colors when money entered the picture. Growing up in Havenbrook, Michigan was what most would call a typical suburban experience. Our two-story house, with the white picket fence on Maple Street, looked picture perfect from the outside. My father Robert worked as a bank manager, and my mother Linda was an administrative assistant at the local hospital. We were solidly middle class, not wanting for necessities but careful with luxuries. But within those walls existed a dynamic that shaped my entire life, the undeniable favoritism my parents showed toward my younger brother Alex. From our earliest years, the differences in how we were treated were subtle but unmistakable. Alex was the athletic one, the charming one, the son who seemed to effortlessly embody everything my parents valued. I was the bookish, quieter child who preferred libraries to baseball fields. This difference alone might not have been an issue if my parents had celebrated our individual strengths equally. They did not. Our living room became a shrine to Alex and his accomplishments. Shelves lined with his baseball trophies, football medals, and soccer awards dominated the space. My academic certificates and writing awards were tucked away in a drawer or briefly displayed before being replaced by his latest athletic triumph. When I won the state essay competition in 10th grade, my mother nodded and said, "That is nice, Ross." When Alex scored the winning touchdown in a regular season game, my parents threw a party and invited the entire neighborhood. The pattern continued through high school. When college application time arrived, my parents made it abundantly clear where their priorities lay. For Alex, they created a special college fund that covered his entire education at State University. For me, they offered to help with some expenses, but explained that taking out student loans would build character and teach responsibility. I graduated with nearly $70,000 in student debt while Alex walked away debt-free. Their justifications always sounded reasonable on the surface. Alex has a special talent that could lead to a professional career. Scholarships are more available for academics than sports. Ross is the responsible one who can handle managing his own finances. Each explanation reinforced the message that somehow Alex deserved more support, more celebration, more love. I chose to become an English teacher because literature had always been my refuge. Books did not play favorites. Characters did not value athletic prowess over intellectual curiosity. My decision was met with thinly veiled disappointment from my father. Teaching is a noble profession, but there is not much money in it, he remarked when I announced my career choice. When Alex decided to go into business, my father personally introduced him to his banking colleagues and helped him secure his first position. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance. How is Alex doing with his new promotion? Did you hear Alex is looking at houses in the lakeside community? Alex is dating a doctor now. My own accomplishments or struggles rarely warranted more than cursory inquiries. When I received Teacher of the Year at my school, my mother responded, "That is wonderful, honey. Did you hear Alex might be getting a company car?" Despite this obvious imbalance, I continued seeking their approval well into my adult years. I called weekly, visited for Sunday dinners, remembered every birthday and anniversary, and maintained the role of dutiful son. Some deeply ingrained part of me still hoped that eventually they would see me, value me, and love me equally. My financial situation as a teacher was always tight. The student loan payments took a substantial portion of my monthly income, leaving little room for savings or luxuries. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a decent but not great part of town. My car was a 12-year-old Honda with almost 200,000 miles on it. I clipped coupons, bought store brands, and learned to be content with simple pleasures. 6 months ago, my girlfriend Melissa ended our 3-year relationship. Though she cited growing apart as the reason, the tension over finances had been building for some time. She wanted to travel, buy a house, start planning for a family. I wanted those things too, but my financial reality made them distant dreams rather than attainable goals. The breakup left me questioning my life choices and feeling like I had failed at yet another thing that Alex excelled at. He had been married to his college sweetheart Natalie for 5 years, with seemingly perfect domestic bliss. Through it all, I maintained a generally positive outlook. My students brought me joy. My small circle of close friends provided the genuine support my family did not. I found satisfaction in simple pleasures like a good book, hiking local trails, or cooking an elaborate meal from scratch. And I allowed myself one small luxury, one tiny act of hope each week. Every Friday, I would stop at the corner store and buy a single lottery ticket. It was more ritual than serious gambling, a $5 investment in possibility. Never did I imagine that one of those tickets would actually change everything. It was a Tuesday evening in April when my life changed. The stack of sophomore literature essays on my coffee table looked particularly daunting, and I had been grading for 3 hours straight. My eyes needed a break, so I decided to check the lottery numbers from the previous Friday. I had almost forgotten about the ticket tucked into my wallet. I pulled up the lottery website on my laptop and retrieved the crumpled ticket from my wallet. As I compared the numbers on my screen to those on the ticket, my heart began to race. The first number matched, then the second. By the time I reached the final number, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the ticket. "This cannot be right," I said aloud to my empty apartment. I checked again, and again. 6 numbers all matching perfectly. According to the website, there had been only one winning ticket for the $800,000 prize. My ticket. I stood up so quickly I knocked over my cup of cold coffee. Pacing around my small living room, I tried to process what was happening. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Was I misreading the numbers? I took a photo of the ticket and the website screen side by side, staring at the image as if it might change if I looked away. After the initial shock subsided enough for rational thought, I called the one person I knew would ground me, my best friend Thomas. "Hey man, what is up?" Thomas answered casually. "I think I just won the lottery." I blurted out, my voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking it too loudly might make it untrue. "Very funny, Ross. What is really going on?" "No, Thomas, I am serious. $800,000. I am looking at the matching numbers right now." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds before Thomas let out a low whistle. "Holy shit, Ross. Are you sure?" I read him the numbers one by one, and he confirmed what I already knew. This was real. This was actually happening. Thomas came over immediately, and we spent hours discussing what this meant. He brought a bottle of champagne, and we toasted to what felt like the beginning of a new chapter in my life. We talked until 3 in the morning about all the possibilities this money represented. "First thing, those student loans are history," Thomas said, raising his glass. "And maybe a decent car that does not make that weird noise on the highway," I added. "You could buy a house, man. A real house with a yard and everything. I could travel during summer breaks instead of picking up tutoring gigs." As the night wore on, the ideas became more elaborate and occasionally ridiculous. "Private Island," Thomas suggested after his 4th glass. But we both understood the fundamental truth. This money represented freedom from the financial stress that had defined my adult life. The next morning, with a slight champagne headache and a clearer mind, I decided to keep the win quiet until I had gone through the official verification process. The lottery website outlined the steps for claiming a major prize, and I followed them meticulously. I signed the back of the ticket, made multiple copies, and stored the original in a sealed envelope in my fireproof lockbox. The verification process was surprisingly efficient but thorough. I had to present multiple forms of identification, answer questions about when and where I purchased the ticket, and sign numerous documents. Throughout the process, the reality of the situation continued to sink in. This was not a dream or a mistake. I, Ross Anderson, teacher, and perpetual financial struggler, had won $800,000. Then came the sobering discussion about taxes. The lottery official explained that approximately 38% would go to federal and state taxes, reducing my windfall to around $500,000. Still an incredible life-changing sum, but important to understand the actual amount I would receive. With the verification complete and the reality of my win fully confirmed, I scheduled an appointment with a financial advisor recommended by the Lottery Commission. Janet Pierce had specialized experience working with lottery winners and came highly recommended for her practical conservative approach. Our first meeting lasted nearly 3 hours as Janet helped me create a comprehensive financial plan. First priority, paying off my student loans, which would immediately free up $500 in monthly payments. Second, setting aside enough for a modest down payment on a house in a good neighborhood but nothing extravagant. Third, creating a diversified investment portfolio that would provide long-term growth and some passive income. The goal here is not to change your lifestyle dramatically, Janet advised. That is how lottery winners end up broke again. The goal is to eliminate financial stress and create stability. I appreciated her practical approach. I had no desire for mansions or sports cars. What I wanted was the freedom to live without constant financial anxiety, to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what I could afford, and perhaps to explore opportunities I had previously dismissed as financially impossible. As I left Janet's office with a solid plan in place, I felt a weight lifting that I had carried for so long. I had almost forgotten it was there. For the first time in my adult life, I would be debt-free. I could buy groceries without calculating the total as I shopped. I could get my car repaired without wondering which bill would have to be delayed to cover it. The question remained who to tell and when. I had kept the news between Thomas and myself so far, but now that everything was official, I needed to share it with others. After some consideration, I decided to tell my family at our upcoming Sunday dinner, a monthly tradition I had maintained despite the constant reminders of my second-tier status in the family hierarchy. I looked forward to seeing their reactions, particularly my father's. Maybe now finally he would look at me with the same pride he reserved for Alex. Maybe this would be the thing that finally made me enough in their eyes. How wrong I was. The last Sunday of each month was always reserved for dinner at my parents' house. I arrived at 5:30, the same as always, but everything else felt different. I carried a bottle of champagne, a small symbolic gesture to mark the occasion of my announcement. As I walked up the familiar brick path to the front door, a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety swirled in my stomach. My mother answered the door with her usual perfunctory hug. "Ross, you are right on time. Your brother and Natalie are already here." The living room tableau was familiar. My father and Alex engaged in animated conversation about business prospects, while my mother and Natalie arranged appetizers on the coffee table. As always, I existed somewhat on the periphery of this family portrait. "Ross brought champagne," my mother announced, examining the bottle. "What is the occasion?" "I thought we might have something to celebrate tonight," I replied with a smile. My father glanced over. "Did you finally get that department head position you mentioned?" "No, nothing like that. Just thought it would be nice." I was saving my news for dinner when I had everyone's full attention. Conversation through appetizers and into the main course followed familiar patterns. Alex dominated the discussion with stories about his latest business networking event, while my parents hung on every word. I answered the usual cursory questions about my teaching job and deflected inquiries about my love life since the breakup with Melissa. As my mother served dessert, a homemade apple pie that had been my favorite since childhood, I decided the moment had arrived. I cleared my throat, an uncharacteristically assertive sound that caused everyone to look in my direction. "I actually have some news to share." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "That is why I brought the champagne." "You met someone new?" my mother asked hopefully. "No, nothing like that," I replied. "The thing is, I won the lottery last week. $800,000. The silence that followed was absolute. 4 pairs of eyes stared at me with expressions ranging from disbelief to shock. My father was the first to recover. "The lottery you actually won?" His tone carried surprise and something else I could not quite identify. "Yes. After taxes, it will be around $500,000. I have already gone through the verification process and met with a financial advisor." My mother let out a small gasp. "Ross, that is wonderful. What a blessing." Alex offered congratulations that seemed genuine enough, while Natalie peppered me with questions about how it felt to win and what I planned to do with the money. "Well, first I am paying off my student loans," I explained, feeling a surge of pride as I outlined the responsible financial plan Janet had helped me create. "Then I am putting a down payment on a modest house, nothing fancy, but in a good neighborhood." The rest will be carefully invested for the future. As I spoke, I noticed my parents exchanging glances. My mother's initial excitement seemed to be fading into something more calculating. When I finished outlining my plans, she placed her hand on mine in a gesture that would have seemed affectionate if not for the tension in her fingers. That sounds very sensible, dear. But have you thought about your family in these plans? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? My father leaned forward, elbows on the table. Ross, you know your brother has been having some difficulties with his new business venture. The startup costs were more than anticipated, and there have been some unexpected setbacks. This was news to me. Alex had been talking about nothing but success and growth opportunities throughout dinner. I am sorry to hear that, I said carefully. I did not realize. The thing is, my mother continued, Alex and Natalie have the mortgage on their new house, and with the baby coming next year. Natalie looked down at her plate, seemingly uncomfortable. This was the first I had heard about a pregnancy. What your mother is trying to say, my father cut in his tone, shifting to the authoritative voice he used when delivering final verdicts, is that it would make sense for you to share this windfall with your brother. Half would be the fair thing to do. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. I stared at my father, certain I had misheard. You want me to give Alex $400,000, half of my lottery winnings. After taxes, so about $250,000, my father clarified as if the reduced amount made the request reasonable. Alex has a family to support. You are single. The right thing to do is share your good fortune. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to say this was an elaborate joke. Alex maintained a studied interest in his dessert plate. Natalie looked uncomfortable but silent. My mother nodded encouragingly, as if her agreement made the outrageous request somehow normal. I do not understand, I finally managed. Why would I give Alex half of my lottery winnings? Because family takes care of family, my mother said, her voice taking on the slightly wounded tone she used when her children failed to meet her expectations. Alex would do the same for you. Would he, I wondered. Alex had never shared anything with me without parental intervention, from childhood toys to the car we briefly co-shared in high school. Besides, my father added, you do not need all that money. Your lifestyle is simple. Alex has real responsibilities, a mortgage in a good neighborhood, a baby on the way. And I have $70,000 in student debt, and have been driving the same car for 12 years, I countered, my voice rising slightly. I have been struggling financially my entire adult life, while Alex got a free college education and help with his first house down payment. The table went silent again. I had never spoken so bluntly about the financial disparities and how we had been treated. That is different, my father said dismissively. Those were parental decisions about how to allocate family resources. This is about you choosing to help your brother in his time of need. His time of need, he just told us his business is expanding into new markets. My mother's face hardened slightly. There have been some challenges he did not want to burden everyone with. Your brother has pride. Alex finally spoke up. Look, Ross, I would not ask this if things were not serious. The business had some setbacks, and I have had to take out some personal loans that are coming due. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This was not about family support or fairness. Alex had financial problems he had hidden from everyone, and now my parents saw my windfall as the solution. I am sorry about your business difficulties, I said carefully. But I won this money by chance. I have plans for it. Plans that will finally give me the financial security I have never had. My father's expression darkened. After all we have done for you, this is how you repay our support. By refusing to help your brother when you have the means. What exactly have you done for me? The question escaped before I could censor it, carrying the weight of decades of unequal treatment. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. My father straightened in his chair, his face flushing with anger. Either you help your brother, or maybe you are not the son we raised. He said each word precise and cutting. This is what family does. We support each other. My mother reached for my hand again. Ross, sweetheart, think about what this money could do for Alex and Natalie and their baby. After all, we have sacrificed for you over the years. Is this really so much to ask? I looked at their faces, these people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and saw nothing but expectation and entitlement. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of seeking approval, of accepting second place in my parents' hearts, of making myself smaller to avoid rocking the family boat, suddenly seemed like a terrible waste. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin beside my half-eaten pie. "I think I should go." "Ross, do not be dramatic," my mother said. "Sit down and let us discuss this rationally." "There is nothing to discuss. It is my money, and I will not be giving half of it to Alex." My father's face hardened into a mask of disapproval I knew all too well. "If that is your attitude, perhaps it would be best if you did leave, and maybe reconsider what it means to be part of this family." The threat was clear: comply or be cast out. For the first time in my life, I chose the latter. "Goodbye," I said simply and walked out the door. The drive home from my parents' house that night was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I realized I was driving too fast only when I nearly missed a stop sign. I pulled over to the side of the road, put the car in park, and sat there trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. My phone began buzzing almost immediately. First came a text from my mother. "I cannot believe you would walk out like that. So disrespectful. Please come back so we can talk about this like adults." Then my father: "Your behavior was completely unacceptable. You need to think about your priorities and what family means." I silenced the phone and drove the rest of the way home in quiet shock. Once inside my apartment, I called Thomas. They asked for what Thomas exclaimed after I recounted the evening's events. "Half your lottery winnings, are they serious?" "Completely serious," I confirmed, pacing my small living room. They acted like it was the most reasonable request in the world, like I would be selfish not to do it. "That is insane, Ross. Absolutely insane. The worst part is I almost considered it for a minute. That is how conditioned I am to giving them what they want to, trying to earn their approval." Thomas was silent for a moment. "You know this is not normal, right? Parents are not supposed to play favorites like this. They are not supposed to demand their adult children give away their money, even to siblings." His words hit me hard. I had normalized so much over the years, accepted the unequal treatment as just how our family worked. Hearing Thomas state so plainly how wrong it was felt both validating and painful. "What are you going to do?" he asked finally. "I have no idea," I admitted. "But I know I am not giving Alex the money." That night was just the beginning. Over the next week, the pressure campaign escalated. My parents called multiple times daily. When I stopped answering, they left voicemails ranging from guilt-inducing, "After all we have sacrificed for you," to angry, "Your selfishness is breaking this family apart," to falsely conciliatory, "We just want to talk, no pressure." The extended family was enlisted next. My Aunt Cynthia called to check in, but quickly revealed her true purpose. "Your parents are so upset, Ross. Surely there is some compromise you can reach. Family has to stick together." My Uncle Greg took a more direct approach. "Man up and help your brother out. That is what family does." Even cousins I barely spoke to throughout the year suddenly had opinions on what I should do with my money. The family group chat became so toxic with passive-aggressive comments that I had to mute it entirely. At school, I tried to maintain my focus on teaching, but the constant barrage of messages left me distracted and irritable. A few colleagues noticed my mood shift, and I found myself confiding in Jennifer, the science teacher whose classroom was across from mine. "They have no right to demand that from you," she said firmly during our shared lunch period. "Absolutely none. And using family as emotional blackmail is manipulative and wrong." Her clear-eyed assessment helped strengthen my resolve. So did conversations with other friends who expressed similar outrage on my behalf. It was as if I had been living in a distorted reality where my parents' behavior seemed somewhat normal, and now outside perspectives were showing me just how abnormal it actually was. A week after the disastrous dinner, Alex finally called. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Ross, this has gotten out of hand," he began, his tone conciliatory. "Mom and Dad are really upset." "I am aware," I replied coolly. "Look, I know the way they presented it was not great. But I really could use some help here, brother. Things with the business are worse than I have let on. I have got some investors breathing down my neck, and the bank is not being flexible about these loans. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. I am sorry to hear that, Alex. Genuinely. But that does not mean I should give you half of my lottery winnings. Maybe not half, he conceded, showing his hand. But even 100,000 would make a huge difference right now. Just to tide me over until things turn around. And there it was. He was still asking for my money, just negotiating the amount. No recognition of how inappropriate the request was. Just a tactical adjustment. No, Alex. I am not giving you any of the money. I have my own financial plans, my own future to secure. His tone changed instantly. So that is it. Your own brother is drowning financially, and you just watch from the shore with your pockets full of cash. Nice, Ross. Really nice. The call ended with Alex telling me I would regret my selfishness, a threat that sounded eerily like something our father would say. I blocked his number after that, along with my parents. I needed space to think, to process, to strengthen my newfound resolve. That reprieve lasted exactly 3 days before my parents showed up unannounced at my apartment door on a Saturday morning. I considered not answering, but the persistent knocking would eventually disturb my neighbors. When I opened the door, my mother immediately pushed past me into the apartment, my father following close behind. The small space that had always felt adequate to me suddenly seemed cramped and shabby under their critical gaze. We need to talk about this in person, since you have been ignoring our calls, my father stated, making himself comfortable on my couch without being invited to sit. There is nothing to discuss, I said, remaining standing. I am not giving Alex the money. My mother looked around the apartment with a performative sadness. Look at how you live, Ross. A small apartment, second-hand furniture. And now you could help your brother who has worked so hard to build a good life, and you refuse. Worked hard, I repeated incredulously. Alex has been handed everything his entire life. You paid for his education. You helped with the down payment on his house. You bought him his first car while I worked summers to buy a used one. That is not true, my father protested, but weakly. It is absolutely true. And now I discover you have been bailing him out of business failures too. How many times have you given him money that he has lost? My parents exchanged a glance that told me I had hit on something significant. Your brother has an entrepreneurial spirit, my father said defensively. Sometimes ventures fail. That is part of business. How many times I pressed. My mother sighed. There was the food truck concept in 2018, and the sports memorabilia website the year after that. And now this current situation with the marketing consultancy. And you paid for all of those failures. We helped him, my father corrected. As parents should. But you never helped me with my student loans. Those were my responsibility, remember. Because it would build character. The hypocrisy was so blatant it was almost laughable. Almost. The situation is different now, my father insisted. Alex has serious debt. The kind that could affect his credit rating for years. He and Natalie might lose their house. Because of his poor decisions, I pointed out. Meanwhile, I have been financially responsible my entire adult life. I have lived within my means, paid my bills on time, never asked you for a dime after college. And now that I finally have a chance at financial security, you want me to give it away to fix Alex's mistakes. My mother's eyes welled with tears, a tactic I had seen her employ countless times when logic failed her. He is your brother, Ross. Family stands by family. Where was this family solidarity when I was drowning in student debt? When I was driving a car that broke down every other month because I could not afford a reliable one? When Melissa left me, partly because I could not offer the financial stability she wanted? My parents looked genuinely surprised at this last revelation. Perhaps they had never considered that my financial struggles had real consequences in my life. We did not realize. My mother began. You never asked, I cut her off. You never asked because you never really cared about my struggles. It was always about Alex. His achievements. His needs. His problems. My father stood up, his face flushed with anger. That is unfair and untrue. We have always loved both our sons equally. The lie was so transparent I actually laughed. Dad, please. You have never treated us equally. Not once in our entire lives. If you refuse to help your brother in his time of need, then perhaps you are not the son we thought you were, my father said, falling back on the same threat he had used at dinner. But this time it did not land with the same impact. Something had shifted in me, a lifetime of seeking approval suddenly seeming like a fool's errand. Maybe I am not, I agreed calmly. Maybe I am finally becoming the person I should have been all along. Someone who values himself enough not to be manipulated and used. We are not manipulating you, my mother protested. Then leave. Accept my decision about my money and leave. They did not leave. Instead, my father escalated to his final threat. If this is your choice, Ross, then do not expect to remain part of this family. I looked at them both. These people who had shaped me, raised me, and consistently undervalued me, and felt a strange sense of calm clarity. If being part of this family requires me to set myself on fire to keep Alex warm, then maybe I do not want to be part of it anymore. The words hung in the air between us, shocking all three of us with their finality. My mother gasped. My father's face went from red to white. You do not mean that, my mother whispered. I think I do, I replied, surprised to find that I actually did. I think it is time for you to go now. They left in stunned silence. My father's parting words, a quiet, "You will regret this," that sounded more uncertain than threatening. As I closed the door behind them, I felt something unexpected relief. For the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself against the two people whose approval I had sought most desperately. And though it hurt, it also felt like the first step toward something better. The weeks following my confrontation with my parents were simultaneously the most difficult and most liberating of my life. The initial relief of standing my ground gradually gave way to a complicated grief. I was mourning not just the temporary loss of my family relationships, but the permanent loss of the fantasy that they would ever truly see me, value me, or treat me fairly. Despite the emotional turmoil, I proceeded with my financial plans exactly as Janet and I had outlined. The day I paid off my student loans ranks among the most satisfying moments of my life. After carrying that burden for so long, the feeling of freedom was indescribable. I actually printed out the final payment confirmation and framed it a reminder of one major life goal accomplished. With my credit score improved by the loan payoff and a substantial down payment available, I began looking at modest homes in neighborhoods I had previously only driven through wistfully. Not the luxury communities where Alex and Natalie lived, but solid, pleasant areas with good schools, an occupational habit of evaluation, and well-maintained properties. After viewing a dozen possibilities, I found a charming 3-bedroom craftsman-style house on a quiet street lined with mature oak trees. Built in the 1960s but recently updated, it offered the perfect balance of character and modern convenience. The backyard was small but featured a wooden deck and enough space for the garden I had always wanted to plant. At $250,000, it was well within my budget, even with a substantial emergency fund set aside. This is a solid choice, Janet confirmed when I brought her the details. Reasonable price point for the neighborhood, good potential for appreciation. And the mortgage payment will actually be less than your current rent. We adjusted the investment portfolio, accordingly balancing the house purchase with enough liquid assets to furnish the home and cover any unexpected repairs or expenses. The remaining funds were divided between retirement accounts, medium-term investments, and a small opportunity fund that could be used for education, travel, or other life-enriching experiences. As the home purchase progressed through inspections and paperwork, I made another significant change. I traded in my ancient Honda for a new Subaru. Nothing flashy or luxury branded, just a reliable, practical vehicle with modern safety features and the simple luxury of not making concerning noises on the highway. These practical improvements to my living situation were matched by less tangible but equally important changes. At Thomas's persistent suggestion, I began seeing a therapist to address the family dynamics that had shaped so much of my life and self-perception. Dr. Marshall specialized in family relationship issues and offered insights that were sometimes uncomfortable but ultimately healing. What you are describing is a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic, she explained during one particularly enlightening session. It is a dysfunctional family system, not a reflection of your worth. Over weeks of sessions, patterns I had never fully recognized came into sharp focus. The way my parents had positioned Alex and me as opposite sides of a coin rather than individuals. How they had used comparison as a tool of control. The subtle and not so subtle ways they had trained me to accept less while expecting me to give more. The lottery win did not create this problem, Dr. Marshall noted. It simply made the existing dynamic so extreme that you could no longer ignore it. This perspective helped me see my decision to stand firm not as selfish or greedy, but as a necessary step toward healthy boundaries and self-respect. For the first time, I was prioritizing my own well-being without guilt or apology. As the school year wound down, I decided to use some of my opportunity fund for something I had always wanted to do, attend an intensive summer workshop on creative writing at Berkeley. The 3-week program had always been financially out of reach, but now I could afford both the tuition and the time away from summer tutoring. The workshop proved transformative in unexpected ways. Beyond improving my writing skills, it connected me with people who shared my passions and valued my perspective. I formed friendships that were based on mutual interests and genuine connection rather than obligation or history. Among them was Allison, a fellow teacher from Oregon, whose insightful feedback on my writing evolved into coffee discussions, then dinners, and eventually a tentative but promising romantic connection. "You talk about books the way most people talk about people they are in love with," she observed one evening as we walked along the Berkeley Marina. "Your whole face lights up." "Books have always been safer than people," I admitted. "They do not play favorites or change the rules without warning. Not all people do those things," she said gently. "Just the ones who taught you to expect it." By the time I returned home to prepare for the new school year, I felt like a different person. My new house was waiting the purchase finalized while I was away. Moving in was a profound experience, each box unpacked, representing a choice I had made for myself rather than a compromise based on financial limitations. I splurged on a few quality furniture pieces. I had always wanted a real wood dining table instead of the hand-me-down from my college apartment, a comfortable reading chair positioned perfectly by the bay window in the living room, a king-sized bed that felt almost decadently spacious after years of sleeping on a full. None of it was extravagant, but all of it was chosen with intention and appreciation. The timing of my return coincided with an unexpected opportunity at school. The department head position I had mentioned to my father months earlier suddenly opened when Mrs. Winters announced her early retirement. Despite being one of the younger teachers in the department, my innovative curriculum approaches and consistent student engagement metrics made me a strong candidate. When the principal called me into her office in late August, I was prepared for either outcome, a new confidence, allowing me to see that my worth was not determined by any single professional achievement. "Ross, we would like to offer you the department head position," Principal Garcia said with a smile. "Your interview was excellent, and your vision for interdisciplinary collaboration particularly impressed the committee." The validation felt wonderful, but I realized it did not feel necessary in the way it once might have. I accepted the position with genuine gratitude and excitement about the possibilities it presented, but without the desperate need for external validation that had previously driven so many of my efforts. As the new school year began, I settled into a rhythm that felt both new and natural. My commute from the new house was shorter, giving me more time in the mornings to enjoy coffee on my deck. The department head responsibilities added complexity to my schedule, but also brought new creative challenges I enjoyed tackling. My relationship with Allison continued to develop through long-distance calls and weekend visits, unrushed and thoughtful. Most significantly, I was learning to enjoy my success without guilt or justification. The modest changes to my lifestyle were not about flaunting wealth, but about removing the constant stress of financial precarity. I could buy groceries without mental calculations. I could replace something when it wore out rather than making do. I could say yes to dinner with colleagues without checking my bank balance first. The lottery win had not fundamentally changed who I was. I still loved teaching, still cared deeply about my students, still found joy in simple pleasures. What had changed was my relationship with myself and my willingness to accept less than I deserved in any aspect of my life. What I did not know was that as I was rebuilding my life, my family was facing a reckoning of their own. 3 months after winning the lottery, I had established a new normal that felt sustainable and satisfying. The occasional pangs of family estrangement were real but manageable, especially with the support of therapy, new friendships, and my developing relationship with Allison. I had not spoken to my parents or Alex since the confrontation in my apartment, and while that silence sometimes felt like a wound, it was one that seemed necessary for healing. Then came the call from my cousin Julia, who had always been kind to me and remained neutral in the family drama. "Ross, I thought you should know what is happening," she began cautiously. "Things with Alex have gotten worse." According to Julia, Alex's business had not just hit a rough patch, it had completely collapsed. The temporary setbacks my parents had alluded to were actually fundamental flaws in his business model combined with mismanagement of investor funds. Now those investors were threatening legal action. "Your parents refinanced their house to help him," Julia explained. "They took out a second mortgage and gave him almost all of their retirement savings. It still was not enough." The news sent a complicated mix of emotions through me, concern for my parents' vindication that my refusal had been justified, and a lingering sadness at the entire situation. "There is more," Julia continued reluctantly. "Natalie left him last week, took the dog, and moved back with her parents. Apparently she had no idea how bad the financial situation was until the bank called about missed mortgage payments. He had been lying to her too. The final revelation struck hardest. Your dad had a minor heart attack 2 days ago. The doctors say it was stress-related. He is okay, but it scared everyone. After thanking Julia for the information, I sat on my deck for hours processing everything. The family that had demanded half my lottery winnings to help Alex had nearly bankrupted themselves trying to do exactly that. The brother who had always been held up as the successful one had been living on borrowed money and borrowed time. The parents who had accused me of selfishness had sacrificed their own financial security in a futile attempt to prop up Alex's failing business. The situation called for reflection, not reaction. I discussed it with Dr. Marshall in our next therapy session. "What are you feeling about this news?" she asked. "Conflicted," I admitted. "Part of me thinks they brought this on themselves. Another part feels genuinely sad that things have fallen apart like this. And there is this small voice wondering if I should have helped after all. Would your financial help have actually solved the underlying problems?" I considered this carefully. It would just have delayed the inevitable and made me part of the dysfunction. Alex needed to face consequences for his choices. And what about now? What are you considering? I do not know. My father had a heart attack. That changes things somehow. Dr. Marshall nodded thoughtfully. It is possible to maintain your boundaries while still offering appropriate support. The question is what that looks like for you. After several more days of consideration, I reached out to my mother via email suggesting we meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop halfway between our homes. To my surprise, she agreed immediately. When I arrived at the cafe, I almost did not recognize my mother. In just 3 months, she seemed to have aged years. The carefully maintained hair and makeup that had been her standard were replaced by a simpler, more subdued appearance. Her shoulders slumped slightly as she sat waiting at a corner table. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down across from her. The usual judgmental undertone was absent from her voice, replaced by simple weariness. "How is Dad doing?" I asked. "Better. The doctors say he needs to reduce stress and make some lifestyle changes." She stirred her coffee absently. It scared us all. Julia told me some of what has been happening. With Alex's business and everything. My mother nodded, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. "It has been difficult. We did not realize how bad things were until it was too late. Alex kept saying he just needed a little more time, a little more money, and everything would turn around. And now everything is gone. Our retirement savings. The equity in the house. Alex and Natalie's marriage." She looked up at me finally. "I owe you an apology, Ross." What we asked of you at that dinner was wrong. We were desperate and afraid. But that does not excuse it. The apology, though imperfect, was more than I had ever expected to hear from her. It lacked specific acknowledgement of the lifetime of favoritism. But it was a start. Tell me what really happened with Alex, I said. Over the next hour, my mother revealed the full extent of the situation, filling in gaps that even Julia had not known. Alex's successful business ventures had all been smoke and mirrors, each failure covered up by increasingly desperate measures. What began as poor business decisions had evolved into something more concerning, a gambling addiction that had drained both his business funds and personal finances. We did not know about the gambling until Natalie found the credit card statements, my mother explained. By then, he was over $200,000 in debt, beyond the business losses. And Dad had a heart attack when he found out. Not exactly. It was after a confrontation with one of Alex's investors who came to the house. The man was shouting, threatening legal action. Your father tried to reason with him, but the stress was too much. I absorbed this information slowly. What happens now? We do not know. The house might go into foreclosure if we cannot make the payments. Alex might face legal consequences. Everything we worked for. Her voice broke slightly. Despite everything, I felt a surge of compassion for my mother. She had made terrible choices, based on a lifetime of enabling Alex. But her suffering was real. I want to help, I said carefully, but not by just handing over money. That would just continue the same patterns that got everyone into this mess. My mother looked up, hope and wariness competing in her expression. What do you mean? Alex needs professional help for his gambling addiction. Real help, not just family covering for him. And if I get involved at all, it would have to be with strict conditions. We agreed to meet again, this time with my father included once he was feeling stronger. 2 weeks later, we gathered at my new house, a neutral location that also subtly established the shift in family dynamics. My father looked pale and moved more slowly than I remembered, the heart attack having taken a visible toll. This is a nice place, he said as he looked around my living room. There was no criticism in his tone, just simple observation. Thank you, I replied. I like it. Once they were settled, I outlined what I was willing to do and what I expected in return. I had consulted with both Dr. Marshall and Janet Pierce to develop a plan that would help without enabling further dysfunction. I am willing to help Alex get into a proper treatment program for gambling addiction, I stated clearly. I will pay for it directly, not by giving him money. But he has to commit to the full program and follow through. My parents nodded, the fight and entitlement of our previous encounters notably absent. For you both, I am willing to help prevent foreclosure on your house, but only if you agree to financial counseling and a realistic budget going forward. And everyone, including Alex, needs to participate in family therapy. Family therapy, my father questioned, his tone more curious than resistant. Yes. What happened with Alex and the money is a symptom of larger patterns in our family. If we do not address those, nothing will really change. My mother looked down at her hands. You mean the way we treated you compared to Alex? The direct acknowledgement surprised me. Yes. Among other things. We never meant to hurt you, Ross, my father said quietly. I know, but you did, and we need to address that if we are going to move forward as a family. The conversation continued for hours, more honest than any we had ever had. There were difficult moments, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves, but also glimpses of genuine reflection and remorse. The final step was a meeting with Alex himself. I insisted it happen at my therapist's office with Dr. Marshall facilitating. Alex arrived looking nothing like the confident, successful image he had always projected. Unshaven with dark circles under his eyes and clothes that seemed to hang on his frame, he was a physical manifestation of his collapsed facade. I do not know what to say, he began awkwardly. Thank you for agreeing to see me. We need to talk honestly about what has been happening, I replied. All of it. With Dr. Marshall's skillful guidance, Alex gradually revealed the full extent of his problems. The gambling had started small, just sports betting with colleagues, but escalated rapidly into an all-consuming addiction. The business failures were real, but made catastrophically worse by his gambling losses. He had been living two lives: the successful son my parents bragged about and a desperate addict spiraling out of control. I kept thinking the next bet would fix everything, he explained, voice hollow. One big win, and I could pay everyone back, and no one would ever know how bad it got. Why did you never ask for help? I asked. Real help, not just money. He looked genuinely confused by the question. I did not know how. My whole life has been about being the successful one, the one who had it all together. Admitting I had completely failed. He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. When I outlined my conditions for help, Alex initially balked at the treatment program requirements. I can handle it on my own now. I have learned my lesson. That is not how addiction works, Dr. Marshall interjected gently, and refusing treatment suggests you are not ready to take full responsibility. It took another week of consideration, but eventually Alex agreed to enter a 90-day inpatient treatment program for gambling addiction. I paid the facility directly as promised, while also arranging for the financial counseling my parents needed. The family therapy sessions were scheduled to begin once Alex completed the initial phase of his treatment. None of it was easy. There were moments of backsliding, of old patterns reasserting themselves. My mother occasionally slipped into martyrdom, my father into authoritarian declarations. But underlying it all was something new, a recognition that the old ways had failed catastrophically and could not continue. As for me, I found an unexpected strength in establishing and maintaining clear boundaries. I was helping on my terms, from a position of compassion rather than obligation or manipulation. For perhaps the first time in my life, I was engaging with my family as an equal adult rather than the perpetual lesser son. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. 6 months after my lottery win, the landscape of my life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. The money itself, while certainly life-changing, had ultimately been less significant than the ripple effects it created in my relationships, self-perception, and future possibilities. My brother Alex had completed the 90-day inpatient treatment program for his gambling addiction and was now living in a transitional housing facility, attending daily support meetings and working with a sponsor. The journey was far from over, but for perhaps the first time in his life he was facing reality without evasion or denial. We spoke weekly, our conversations awkward at first, but gradually evolving into something more authentic than we had ever shared. I always thought you had it easier, he admitted during one particularly honest call. No pressure, no expectations, and I always thought you had everything handed to you, I replied. The golden child, who could do no wrong. Guess we were both wrong in different ways. It was a small moment, but representative of the new dynamic slowly forming between us. Not close yet, perhaps never the idealized brotherhood of childhood dreams, but something honest and real. My parents had also undergone significant changes. The financial counseling revealed the full extent of the damage their enabling had caused. They would not lose their house thanks to my carefully structured assistance, but their retirement plans had to be completely reconfigured. My father had returned to work part-time, swallowing his pride to accept a position well below his former status. My mother had taken a job as well, her first in nearly a decade. The family therapy sessions were challenging but productive. Under the guidance of a skilled therapist, patterns that had gone unacknowledged for decades were finally named and examined. My mother cried when confronted with clear examples of the favoritism she had shown. My father struggled to relinquish his authoritarian approach to family problems. Progress came in small, inconsistent increments rather than dramatic breakthroughs, but it came nonetheless. I always thought being a good parent meant treating my children the same, my mother said during one session. But I did not. And I cannot undo that history. No, you cannot, the therapist agreed. But you can acknowledge it, learn from it, and behave differently moving forward. Meanwhile, my own life continued to flourish in ways both expected and surprising. My new home had become a true sanctuary, a place that reflected my personality and priorities in every detail. The garden I had planted in the backyard yielded its first modest harvest of tomatoes and herbs. The reading nook in the bay window became my favorite spot for Sunday mornings with coffee and a book. Professionally, I found unexpected fulfillment in my role as department head. The position brought challenges, certainly, but also opportunities to implement ideas I'd been developing for years. Our department launched a cross-disciplinary reading program that paired literature with history, science, and art in ways that engaged even the most reluctant students. The principal noted increased reading scores across grade levels and credited the initiative. My relationship with Allison deepened despite the geographical distance. We alternated weekend visits between our two cities, discovering a compatibility that went beyond our shared love of literature. When the winter break arrived, we took a trip to Monterey together, walking along the coastal trails and talking about possibilities for the future. Nothing was decided, but doors that had once seemed firmly closed now stood ajar waiting. Through it all, I maintained the careful financial stewardship that Janet had helped me establish. The lottery winnings remained mostly invested, growing steadily, if unspectacularly. I lived comfortably but not extravagantly, finding more satisfaction in security and occasional meaningful experiences than in accumulating possessions. One unseasonably warm evening in early spring, my parents came to dinner at my house. It was not our first meal together since the confrontation, but it was the first that felt genuinely relaxed. My father commented appreciatively on the landscaping I had done. My mother brought a homemade pie without any accompanying passive-aggressive comments about my kitchen or cooking skills. After dinner, sitting on the back deck with coffee, my father cleared his throat in a way that once would have made me tense with anticipation of criticism. "I want to say something, Ross. Something I should have said months ago, maybe years ago." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I am proud of you. Not because of the lottery, or the house, or any of that, because of who you are. A good teacher, a good person, someone who stood his ground when it was hard." The words I had waited a lifetime to hear, delivered simply and sincerely on my own back deck. I felt a knot of emotion tighten in my throat. "It took all of this for me to see how wrong I had been," he continued. "About a lot of things. About what success really means. About what being a father should be." My mother reached over and took my hand, her eyes shining with tears. "We cannot undo the past, Ross. But if you will let us, we would like to be part of your future. A better part than we were before." It was not a perfect resolution. The hurt of decades could not be erased by a single conversation or even months of therapy. Trust that had been broken would take years to fully rebuild. But it was a genuine beginning, rooted in painful truth rather than comfortable denial. As they prepared to leave that evening, my mother hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for the financial help, but for forcing us to face ourselves." After they left, I sat alone on my deck, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky and reflecting on the strange journey the past 6 months had been. The lottery ticket that had seemed like pure luck had actually been the catalyst for a different kind of wealth, altogether self-respect, honest relationships, and the courage to stand firm in my own worth. I thought about the night I had walked out of my parents' house, choosing the uncertainty of conflict over the familiar discomfort of acquiescence. It had been terrifying in the moment, but looking back, I could see it as the first step toward a more authentic life. Sometimes, walking away is not an ending, but a beginning. Sometimes losing what you thought you needed makes space for what you truly deserve. The lottery had not changed who I was at my core. It had simply created the circumstances that allowed me to discover my own strength, to set boundaries that should have been set long ago, and ultimately to forge relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. The money would eventually be spent or invested or passed on. But these lessons, hard-won through difficult conversations and painful realizations, would remain that true wealth lies in knowing your own worth, that helping others works only when it does not harm yourself, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. As I headed inside, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the lottery win itself, but for everything that had followed. The money had not bought happiness, but it had bought something perhaps more valuable: the opportunity to discover, that happiness had been within my reach all along, waiting only for me to believe I deserved it. Have you ever had to walk away from a situation with family or friends to protect your own well-being? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about standing up for yourself. Remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest growth. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to value yourself even when others do not.